If there was ever any doubt about the Trump administration's preference for setting its own diplomatic rules, well, those doubts were surely banished today. Even with the presence of US Vice President J.D. Vance, delegates at a top-level security conference in Munich are tonight still trying to piece together exactly what Donald Trump's plan for Ukraine might entail. There remains deep unease about the contents of his recent telephone call with Vladimir Putin. The EU's top diplomat even used the word appeasement. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy told Mr. Vance that his country needs security guarantees before any peace talks. But despite the pressing issue of Ukraine's future, Mr. Vance launched an extraordinary attack on Europe over free speech and democracy.
Ukraine's president arrived in Munich, the head of a country losing the war and perhaps soon to lose the peace. A leader at the mercy of events.
Will you or anyone from your delegation be meeting any Russians here? Donald Trump said there's going to be meetings here.
No, I don't know about it.
Instead, he raised the stakes, reminded America of what he claims are Putin's true intentions.
I think, Tuama, that he's preparing the war against NATO countries next year.
In Chernobyl, scene of the Soviet-era nuclear disaster, a tangible reminder of the dangers. A warhead struck the ruined plant's protective shield. Russia denied responsibility.
We're, of course, happy to welcome the Ukrainian delegation.
As Ukrainian and US delegations finally faced each other. Hard to say if this was a meeting of minds or a parting of the ways.
We want the war to come to a close. We want the killing to stop, but we want to achieve a durable, lasting peace, not the kind of peace that's going to have Eastern Europe in conflict just a couple years down the road.
We are very thankful for American support. President Trump, we have good conversation today. Our first meeting, not last, I'm sure.
Thank you all.
What is the timeline?
That Ukraine has a seat at the table in a process driven by Washington and Moscow is a small sign of progress. But on display at a gathering dedicated to Western unity are yawning divisions between old allies.
In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town.
America's vice president lectured Europe's leaders on their own faults for failing, he said, to defend free speech and to tackle migration.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within.
So much now comes down as Zelenskyy conceded to the whims of one unpredictable man.
I had good conversation with the President Trump. We had some phone calls, and he had phone call with Putin, and he said to me, I think that that he wants to stop the war. I said to him that he is a liar, and you can count on it.
Munich is synonymous with the appeasement of an earlier age. Now the Americans promise peace in our time, but at what price to Ukraine and to the Western alliance? John Ray, News at 10.
Let's try and unpack that question now with Dan, who's in Washington tonight. And Dan, first we had the American Defence Secretary telling other NATO members the US will not be suckers, as he said. Then today we've got this pretty direct attack on European leaders from the Vice President. So what do you think J.D. Vance's speech tells us about the state of the Western alliance?
Well, I think there will be absolute shock and consternation among many European countries and many around the world as well to hear what J.D. Vance had to say today. The implied support, for example, for the far-right AfD party of Germany just 9 days before the election there. He met, it's reported as well, the leader of AfD after that speech. There was no real mention of Ukraine in his speech. And then for many Democrats, I think here in Washington, felt just rank hypocrisy of hearing J.D. Vance lecturing Europeans on democracy. This, after all, from a man whose boss denies the result of the 2020 election and attempted to rig it as well. Today, unsurprisingly, President Trump was fulsome in his backing of his vice president. Here's what he had to say.
A very good speech, actually, a very brilliant speech. Yeah, Europe has to be careful. And he talked about immigration. And Europe has a big immigration problem. Just take a look at what's happened with crime. Take a look at what's happening in various parts of Europe. I thought his speech was very well received, actually. I've heard very good remarks.
Well, Dan, not much mention from President Trump about Ukraine. We were expecting, of course, the focus to be on that peace plan today. It didn't quite end up like that. Where do the talks about peace go next?
Well, it's not really clear at all, Paul. I mean, Keith Kellogg, who is President Trump's envoy to Russia on Russia and Ukraine, is in Munich. He was at the table today. He's going to present his plan tomorrow at the Security Conference. Peace through strength is what it's called. Then we understand he's heading to Kyiv. But there are concerns that he is being sidelined in all this. ITV News has spoken to one source who's familiar with the discussions over Ukraine between the US and the Russians. And they told us that Donald Trump is being played by the Russians, in their words. They said Putin is trying to pick negotiators. Putin and Russia, they told us, would prefer to be dealing with Steve Witkoff, who is Donald Trump's old real estate buddy from New York, not Keith Kellogg, who is a retired Lieutenant General in the Army. And they finished by telling us that America's allies should be nervous. Well, I think after that speech by JD Vance today, many of those allies are pretty nervous about which direction America is heading in.